The advice and opinions expressed by the host of Autism Live and her guests are meant solely as suggestion and should not be in any way construed as child-specific advice. The Center for Autism and Related Disorders advises working with a board-certified behavior analyst who has experience with autism before starting any intensive behavioral intervention. Any choices you make in determining your child's treatment are completely at your own discretion.
Good morning and welcome to Autism Live. I'm Shannon Penrod and we're webcasting to you live from the Center for Autism and Related Disorders headquarters in Tarzana, California. So thrilled to be here with you this morning. It's just, you know, one of those days where you're feeling all fuzzy about everybody. I just have warm, fuzzy feelings for all of you today. I'm reminded that somebody had said 2 weeks ago, Shannon, don't forget to remind us that we're not in this alone. So I'm going to remind you more often. And I thank you for reminding me of that because it reminds me that I'm not in this alone and that we can all hold hands. We can all do this together, right? So for the next 2 hours, we're going to be here live talking about autism from a 360-degree perspective, talking about all the different things that can be going on in your life and some of the helpful ways that perhaps you can make things glide a little bit easier and get to the good stuff. We want to get to the good stuff, right? I hope that we're able to do that for you. This whole show is meant to be interactive. We want you to participate because, as I've told you before, I gave up mind reading to be an autism mom, so I no longer have the capability to read your mind. And all of us have different circumstances. While I've got warm fuzzies for you and I want to help you, I need more information to know what would help you along your way. And it may be that you don't know what you need either, because there are days when I feel that way. I'm like, somebody says, what can I do to help you? And I have to say, I don't know. That's a good place to start though, but I don't know. Right? In any case, we want to be supportive at the very least. And if we can, to hook you up with some resources that will help you to get to that progress so you get to the good stuff. So Kelby's going to show you some of the different ways that you can interact with us so that we can hear your voice on this subject. While he's doing that, I'm going to remind you that our homepage is autism-live.com. When you go there, lots to do. Please sign up for the email list. It's free and you won't get anything other than notifications about what's happening on the show, which I think is a really good thing to know. And also on that site, you can watch the live show or watch recently recorded live shows. You can go back through the library and see past shows. And to the side of that is the live feature. Now, we try to leave the live feature active 24 hours a day, 7 days a week now, which means that if it says, you know, Shannon is answering right now, you can put your cursor in that first box that says your comment, type, hit enter, and it will show up here on the screen. Now, obviously, I can't be here 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. I have a kid on the autism spectrum, so I've got places that I need to be. But it will show up here, and the next time we're back in the studio to do a live show, I have the opportunity to interact with you or to have our experts interact with you. And that, my friends, is when it gets exciting, right? So I hope that you'll participate. We love it when you guys give us a comment, even if it's, oh, I love this guest. I'm not grooving on this. Don't know why you had this guest on. We take it all in stride. I don't take it personally because we can't be everybody's cup of tea all the time, but I want to be helpful. So if I'm being helpful, let me know so I know to double down on that. And if I'm not being helpful, let me know so that I can go, we're not going to do any more of that. We don't need that. Not helping people when we do that. All right. I always like to remind you at the start of the show that we have many experts on the show, but I'm not one of them. I'm a parent, I'm a former teacher, and I have a great passion for our community, and I have a vested interest in making sure that we all learn the things that we need to do because I'm a part of this community. I've got an 11-year-old son who was diagnosed at the age of 2.5, and I'm so grateful every single day. I'm so grateful for all the help and support that we got, whether it was just one person who said, oh, you should look into this, or a person who said, you've got to get good quality ABA. I'm grateful for all the help that I got along the way, because if it had been up to me to figure it out, I would still be figuring it out, right? And instead, we got help, we got support, and we got to the good stuff. It wasn't easy. I don't want to ever make the mistake. I tried to make it look easy to my friends, and that, my friends, was a mistake. It was not easy. I cried many tears, had at least one nervous breakdown, and, we're still piecing it back together financially because it was rough. But worth it? Oh my goodness, so worth it. And would I do it again in a heartbeat? Yes. Would I change a couple of things? Yes. But I certainly wouldn't change the fact that we threw all in and said, we're going to get our kid healthy and we're going to get good quality ABA. I would do that again, and I would do it even harder. Because we didn't have skills back then, and I would have it now. I would have that RBT thing, and I would be doing that. So in any case, I want to help you. If I can save you 5 minutes or $5, man, I can sleep better at night knowing that I paid forward the information that I was given. And that's really what my purpose is here. But don't mistake me for the expert. Please, please, please don't do that. I'm in the trenches with all of you, whether you're a parent, a teacher, a practitioner, or an individual who's on the spectrum. I'm with you trying to fight to get that awareness, the funding, the programs, and the resources so that we can get to the good stuff, right? All right. We like to start every morning with something we fondly refer to as the jargon of the day. Right from the very beginning, I was adamant if we were going to do a show that we had to have this feature. And there have been times along the way where people are like, I don't really know how useful this is, but we've started a playlist that's just for jargon terms. And we started that at the request of a couple of our viewers, which I want to thank them for saying, hey, this is what we need. And I see a difference in how we all communicate, and I hear from our experts. I think that's amazing that the person that's writing that in knows that term. That must not be a parent, that must be a practitioner. And I can say to them completely straight-faced, oh no, mon cher, that is a parent, because we know what we're talking about. I love it. And it really is important. For the first 2 years that my son had autism, I rejected the jargon and said, hey, talk to me as if I don't have a degree in psychology. And what I discovered was that wasted everybody's time, and it was obstinate, and sometimes we just have to be willing to learn more things, right? But we got to do it slowly so that we don't get too overwhelmed. Okay, so today's jargon term is EO. Now, I don't know about you, but the first time I saw this, I thought this was in reference to a Michael Jackson 3D movie at Disneyland, right? Doesn't it have something to do with EO, that movie? It doesn't. Not when we're talking about autism. It doesn't have anything to do with Michael Jackson. It doesn't have anything to do with 3D movies. So let's take a look at what EO means. Our actual definition, by the way, EO stands for establishing operation. It's so much clearer, right? Okay, so EO, a motivating operation that establishes, in parentheses, increases the effectiveness of some stimulus, object, or event as a reinforcer, thus increasing the current frequency of all behavior that has been reinforced by that stimulus, object, or event in the past. Ladies and gentlemen, this is why we do jargon, because you can say to yourself, I want to teach myself all about these terms, and somebody says EO, 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 and you go, I'm just, EIEIO, right? I'm going to look it up in the dictionary and see what it says, and you see that Webster's doesn't have it, so you go to a psychology dictionary and you find this kind of a definition, and you go, well, I can close that book knowing absolutely nothing that I didn't know before, right? It doesn't help. Let's go on to our working definition, which I got to tell you isn't that much better today, but don't fear. We're going to talk more about it, and I've got an expert to talk with you about it later on. But working definition for an EO, some internal or external variable that makes particular reinforcers even more reinforcing, thus increasing the likelihood that you will engage in certain behaviors associated with accessing those reinforcers. Oh, my head hurts. Okay, so what are we talking about here? I like to take EO and put it to the side and talk about what's on board. So you've got your toddler who's 3 years old, and the next door neighbor was doing some remodeling in their house the night before, and they continued to work on it until 3 o'clock in the morning, drilling and sawing until 3 o'clock in the morning. You have 17 bags under your eyes and didn't get very good sleep, and your child kept waking up, which woke you up. So you have less ability to cope, and guess who else does? Your child does. Now, we sit down and we're hoping to have a pleasant breakfast, but it isn't quite what the child wanted for breakfast. How likely are you to get a tantrum? You're more likely to get a tantrum, right, having the different breakfast food that's there, than you would if everybody had gotten a good night's sleep. Right? I think we all could agree you're more likely to get the tantrum because the establishing operation is that we've had too little sleep. We've set up some internal or external variable, less sleep, which means I've got less ability to cope, the child's got less ability to cope. We're not going to have as wonderful as an interchange, right? It's what's on board. Now, I can set myself up for complete and total failure with an establishing operation so that I'm more likely to get a tantrum, or I can flip that whole equation on its rear end and I can set myself up for success. So an establishing operation, I like to think of it in the positive because it can work in the negative too, but let's think about it in the positive. What kind of a circumstance could I set up that would make me more likely to succeed, that's going to make it more likely that the individual that I'm teaching, that I'm having a teaching moment with, is going to want to do the thing that they're doing. I want to supercharge my reinforcer, right? And I want to make the circumstances so that I'm more likely to see that target behavior that we keep talking about this week. So what can I do to do that? And it's going to be different for every person, but we talk a lot about satiation on the show, about, you know, if somebody loves chocolate cake, right, that can be a great reinforcer. But if my establishing operation is that I gave chocolate cake to this person every half hour for 4 hours, what's the likelihood that in the 5th hour that cake is actually going to be reinforcing? It's not going to be, right? So sometimes for an establishing operation, we'll say we made chocolate cake not available for a half day. So that when, the establishing operation is there's been no chocolate cake, the chocolate cake comes out, it's sitting on the table, and we go, we're just going to do these 5 math problems. And when you get them done and you get them done right, you're going to get a piece of chocolate cake. How much more likely are we to see that those 5 math problems get done quickly and correctly? If the child truly loves chocolate cake, and if they haven't had it for at least a substantial half day, then it's possible that chocolate cake is going to make it more likely that the behavior happens. That's how we use an establishing operation. You'll see that if somebody asked a question yesterday about potty training, and we were talking about there are lessons in skills for potty training, but it starts with, it'll say EO, and it'll say child has had access to salty snacks and had lots of fluids. Now, why? Why do we give the salty snacks? Because we want to have the most possible opportunity to have success when we put them on the potty. So we backed it up and said, let's feed them a bunch of salty things, because what happens when you drink salty things? You're thirsty. So we're much more likely to get the child drinking a lot of liquid, which means when we put them on the potty, much more likely to see success. Establishing operation. I really think it's worthwhile to always be thinking about that. What can I put on board to create more success? And occasionally to think of it the opposite way, that when you don't have success, well, what was on board? What did I do that set me up for failure? What did I do to set me up for success? How can I do it better? When you start to think of things that way, you're really cooking as a teacher. You're really starting to get down to the meat of it. It gets exciting because it's like a little puzzle to figure out about, okay, what can I do to this environment to make it more likely that I'm going to succeed? Oh my goodness, that's when you get to the good stuff. So EO, something to be mindful of, something to stick in your tool belt and say, I can use this to my advantage. Or when you've blown it, be kind to yourself and say, all right, well, what else was on board? All right, what can I do about that in the future instead of just going, I'm a total failure, right? Take a look at the EOs, and we're going to talk with Dr. Adele about using EOs to our advantage in just a few minutes. So that's our jargon for the day. All right, moving on. We always have a question for you. And keeping in mind, EOs, what sets you up for success? What are the things that help you? I was reading a blog yesterday about, and it totally, this had already been set way, way in advance, but I was reading a blog about somebody saying, well, I know if I get enough sleep and I know if I drink enough water that everything is better, so why can't I get myself to do that? And I thought, oh, guilty as charged, right? If we know that being rested is something that really helps us to get through the day, why wouldn't we make sure that we get to bed on time? And sometimes it's because that immediate gratification thing, right? But we could work on that for ourselves, and we can work on that for our kids. I know what sets me up for success is eating right and eating on a regular schedule, because man, it just messes me up if I don't eat at regular times. So waiting until 2 o'clock in the afternoon to eat lunch, not the thing for success for Miss Shannon. And yet sometimes I get preoccupied and busy and don't do it. What's that about? And you know, I always say to other people, we know, man, I know if I had my child get up in the morning and fed him at 7:30 in the morning and then said, we're going to wait and have lunch at 2, he would start getting uncomfortable around 1 o'clock. So these are some things that we can play with and think to ourselves, what sets me up for success? Because I know, and I know that you guys know, if we're in a good place, when we sit down to work on something with our kids, or we're in the grocery store working on something with our kids, it goes better when we have it together. So what sets you up for success? I want to look at that a little bit later on the show today if we have a moment to see, because give me some ideas. I'm sure that there are things I could be doing better that I haven't even thought of that maybe you guys can think of. All right, we always have a topic of the week. Our topic this whole week, which I'm just loving when we get a chance to talk about it, is what's the target? What's the target? Because if we're trying to teach something and we don't know what the target is, and worse, we've started a lesson, we're talking about the target in our head, we're processing the target, but something else, you know, in what's the movie Up, where the dog that goes squirrel, and it gets focused on the squirrel. Man, that happens in every moment of every life, right? You're having something going on and you're trying to teach the target, something else happens, and then you get sidetracked talking about that. Not necessarily the best thing when we are very focused on a target. Sometimes stuff comes up where you're going to stop everything else because it's a bigger target, right? Like safety. I stop other stuff for safety all the time. But being mindful then, if I've switched my target to, oh, we're going to talk about safety here, then we're not doing this other one. It's all about the priorities. What's the target? You guys have been writing in about this. This clearly hit a nerve with some of you. Even had a wonderful therapist who wrote to me this morning that I'm going to find some time to write back to you today, talking about how great it was to hear about this from the parent's perspective. Because honestly, you guys, I think that this is where we blow it more than any other thing as parents. That, and that we forget to reinforce, right? Because we feel like, well, I reinforced that 2 days ago. It's not going to keep it in place. We got to reinforce. But keeping in mind what the target is and staying focused on that and not being deterred from things like squirrels. You know, I'm speaking metaphorically. So important. We can get so much more done if we keep this in mind. So to that end, some of the different things that we're talking about today on the show, we have Dr. Adele who's going to be joining us in just a few minutes. We're going to be talking with her about establishing operations and how we can make these our friends and when they sometimes sink our boats. And I've also got some autism news for you. In particular, shout out to you, all of you in South Dakota. You're getting it done. I'm impressed. We're going to talk about that and the more information that we got yesterday about what you're actually fighting for. I think it's really important. And then a little bit later on in the show today, we have Dr. Jonathan Tarbox. He's back in the house. He's going to be answering your questions. You can be sending them in now. All of that and ever so much more here on Autism Live after these messages.
Skills is an online program that provides assessment, curriculum, positive behavior support planning for challenging behavior, and progress tracking, and it does this all in one place. The skills assessment and curriculum addresses 8 areas of development, which even includes advanced higher level areas such as executive functions and cognition, which pretty much makes skills the only ABA-based set of curricula for teaching more complex skills, things like problem solving, planning, self-management, perspective taking, and even inferring and predicting others' private events. Skills is a 4-step system. Step 1 is to add the child to your account. Step 2 is to start assessment. The skills assessment is the only ABA-based assessment with psychometric research demonstrating the language subscale to have excellent reliability. Every area of human functioning and typical child development from infancy to adolescence was researched, making the skills assessment the most comprehensive of its kind in the world, and we're quite proud of that.
Skills is easy to use. Simply click Start Assessment and begin answering questions. Or simply type in a keyword, find specific activities to assess, and add activities to treatment. Step 3. Choose activities. Once you've completed the assessment, Skills selects from a pool of 4,000 activities categorized by age, level, and skill type to provide you with exactly those activities each child needs. Start by choosing a curriculum, then a lesson, and finally an activity. Click the information icon to view prerequisites, ages in which targets develop, examples, and IEP goals. Click the video icon to watch a short video. Once you've identified an activity you want to teach, adding activities to treatment is a snap. Step 4. Start treatment. Here you can access customizable activity lesson details, add your own customized targets and exemplars, and edit an activity status such as introducing or mastering it. You can even print handouts such as worksheets, tracking forms, visual aids, and other materials. Skills also offers multiple progress charts mapping curriculum progress, lesson progress, and cumulative number of activities and targets mastered over time. The Skills language curriculum is categorized by verbal behavior type so that users can identify progress for verbal operants, such as echoics, mans, tax, and interverbals.
Skills is one of the only programs that provides the ability to write behavior intervention plans, or BIPs, for challenging behavior.
With just a few clicks, the outline of the behavior intervention plan is written for you and ready to be printed and implemented.
You can learn more about Skills today and get started by visiting us at www.skillsforautism.com, or you can call us at 877-975-4559. Skills. Progress starts here.
Welcome back to Autism Live. We're here with Dr. Adele Nadowski for a segment that we call Real Progress with Dr. Adele. Thank you for being here.
I'm excited to be here. Thank you.
We're always excited when you're here. I always like to remind people that Dr. Nadowski is a wonderful professional and expert in the field of autism. She was one of the co-creators of Skills, which I love to talk about on the show because it's something that I absolutely love. I think it's one of the best gifts given to parents ever.
Thank you.
And I know that it's used by many people, but I think it's a brilliant gift for parents. But you do so many more things than just being one of the co-creators of Skills. You are someone who is so invaluable in our autism community. And I always like to mention, too, that you treat individuals who are on the autism spectrum. That you're not just one of those brains that sits on high and talks about it. You actually treat individuals on the autism spectrum. And so
Yes.
we salute you and we appreciate you.
Thank you.
And I personally have been made a better parent from the time that I've had to converse with you and to learn the things that I've learned about autism.
I'll have to ask Jem about that.
Yeah, well, you know, if you pointed out and said, well, when Mom does this, this is what I told Mom to do, he would go, yes, I like that. But,
That's
you know,
cool.
people frequently say, well, you know, you just know, Nancy Alspaugh Jackson, in fact, even says this to me. She's like, as a parent, you know so much more about ABA than I do, and you just must have taken it more seriously. And I always say, no, I got time to spend with Dr. Nadowski that nobody else got. I didn't understand it the way that I do now. When
You
we-
actually say that?
Of course I do.
Aw, thank you. That's so
Of course I
sweet.
do, because that's the honest truth. I mean, if people are thinking that I started ABA on the first day and that I knew
I just
what
think
I know
you're
now,
brilliant.
well, I am brilliant because you educated me. So
that's
that's
awesome.
if I'm brilliant. I don't think I'm brilliant. But the things that I know because I got to ask so many questions. And I take it very seriously that I know other parents didn't get that opportunity. So I try to help them with the things that you taught me. I take that very seriously to try to spread it around. But if parents are out there thinking that when I was in the trenches, especially the first 3 years of ABA, that I knew what I know now, oh, heavens no. I didn't. Yeah. I would have been a much better, more effective parent if I did. And I think that especially CARD is working really hard to give parents access to education that we didn't have back then, so that they can have that knowledge first day, but I sure didn't. My son was almost done when I had the opportunity to work with you, and I went, oh, man.
That's
if
a
only
huge
I'd known
compliment,
that.
though. Thank you.
Well, thank you. So having said all that, she's here to help us on a regular basis, and she sometimes, if we have time, answers questions from you guys. But we usually give you a topic to talk with us about. So today, Dr. Nadowski is here with us to talk a little bit about establishing operations and maybe help us to know how we can use this in a positive way and notice when we're using it in a negative way. Because an establishing operation, in my mind, it's something that can be your best friend or the thing that sinks your battleship. So tell me if I'm completely barking up a wrong tree.
Well, an establishing operation increases the effectiveness of a reinforcer, and it's an abolishing operation that would decrease the effectiveness. So is that what you're getting at when you say it can either be your best friend or?
Well, I'm thinking, depending on what the reinforcer is, if I want to I think of it as setting my child up for success.
Yeah.
That if I have an EO and I'm using it properly, I set myself and him up for success so that we're more likely to get a target behavior that I want to see. But sometimes I blow it, and I set up circumstances in which the only thing that can possibly be set up for success is a nightmare.
Okay. So give me an example of that.
Well, and I was saying earlier that, if I'm underslept and my child is underslept, and that's the moment in which I want to give him something that's outside the norm of what we normally do, I pretty much have ensured that I'm going to get some pushback from him, and in the worst circumstance, I'm going to get a tantrum.
I see.
But I could set up the circumstances in a way so that if I'm going to teach something that's a little bit difficult, that I'm more likely to get to success by taking care of a couple of things in the environment.
Right. So basically, the easy way to think about it is just think about reinforcers and things that you provide as consequences to your child when you're trying to teach them things and you're trying to increase behaviors. And then think about how the value of those reinforcers can be altered based on other situations and events. So obviously, it would just be good practice to constantly be thinking about whether or not that reinforcer is still going to be valued or not. So, and how can we make it more valuable if we need to?
Okay, so let's say that the kid is really into Buzz Lightyear, that's the thing that they're really into. So, and I'm thinking about thinking, how can I make Buzz Lightyear more valuable?
Right.
How can I make it super powerful? They love Buzz Lightyear, and I want to make it more powerful.
Yeah, it has a lot to do with, how often that the child gets access to it. If it's your only reinforcer and you're doing therapy for 6-8 hours a day, you're going to have a problem because satiation is going to kick in.
Right.
And so what we want to do is actually save it for, if it's the most powerful thing, then save it for what's the biggest priorities during teaching.
So it means that Buzz Lightyear, and this is hard for parents because they think, so he loves Buzz Lightyear and I'm going to make Buzz Lightyear not available all the time. But I always say we want to think of it as not teasing them and saying, look, I'm taking Buzz Lightyear and I'm putting him away and making them think about it, but just, preoccupying them when we're doing something else and not having Buzz Lightyear just available all the time. Is that what we're talking about?
Yeah.
Okay. But I'm thinking, too, that there are other things, like there are different kinds of Buzz Lightyear dolls, and there's Buzz Lightyear stickers, and having a new Buzz Lightyear that does something that the other one doesn't, I would imagine that would be pretty incredible, too.
Definitely.
Okay.
And then also think about it with respect to food. That's important because if you're using edible reinforcers, then you have to remember that there's also that problem of satiation. And so sometimes I've seen people where they give the child their entire lunch and just give them a chance to have a break and eat their lunch, and then immediately afterward they start running lessons and they want to use food now as a reinforcer, and it's not going to work.
Right.
And so that's when I'm an advocate to say, okay, well, don't use food right now, use something else.
Right.
Or if you're going to be using food, then try to teach still while they're eating their lunch, if you can.
Right.
So.
And I think it's just such a, we're talking about minute things, but they're minute things that have such a big impact. I know when we've talked about using meals as reinforcers before, people get concerned about, well, are you telling the child, if you don't do this, you won't get to eat? And I think that's looking at ABA the wrong way entirely to begin with.
Right.
Because when I have seen ABA done really well with quality ABA, they're ensuring that the child gets to success on a regular basis. And I mean like every 10 seconds.
Yeah.
That it's not like spending a whole hour where the child didn't get to success. That would never happen in a good quality ABA program where you're using food as a reinforcer.
Right.
Maybe with a teenager that's much older with something that's really difficult, but you wouldn't be using food as a reinforcer at that point. Mm-hmm. But for the little ones, they're at the table and it's like so fast that they really shouldn't even know what's happening.
Right.
And I just want people to understand that it isn't, that if somebody is taking the lunch and putting it on the counter and saying, you don't get lunch until you get these 22 math problems done, that's not what we're talking about.
No, it's not.
Seriously, because somebody wrote in and said that they had done that to him as a child. They were saying, if you don't do this, then you don't get lunch. Nobody's talking about that. But I have seen this done at my dining room table where the food is there on the thing and they're going, and they're doing flashcards and saying, touch the car. And then, he gets the piece of pineapple in his mouth and he's going, woohoo, and everybody's excited. And then every once in a while, they got other things going on and it looks like a party.
Yeah, and the food is being presented at about the same pace that it would take him to eat it if he was just sitting there eating it freely. It's
honestly
not 22 items and then you get
right
a piece of pineapple.
Right. Yeah. It's amazing when somebody's doing it with skill. But I'm so convinced that we have to keep talking about the difference between quality ABA and some of the really schlocky stuff that's out there, right? I want you guys to be able to recognize it.
Unfortunately.
Yeah. Okay. So, but if, as you were saying, getting back to the establishing operations, if the child just ate lunch and they're reasonably full, it doesn't matter if you're trotting out gummy bears at that point. If it's something that's difficult, the child isn't going to want to do it.
Right. So that's when we call it an abolishing operation.
Okay.
So it decreases the effectiveness of the reinforcer, the fact that they're satiated and full.
Okay.
But there's also been some research to look at presenting reinforcers constantly versus varied. This is actually a study that I also published, constant versus varied reinforcement. And what we found was that kids would respond a lot longer if you varied up your reinforcers as opposed to presenting the same thing over and over. And we even did preference assessments and we were presenting the really preferred items and stuff over and
so
over.
when you say the difference between constant and varied...
So presenting the same reinforcer over and over and over, even when it's highly preferred, can lose its value.
Okay.
But if you vary it and on every once in a while you present something else too.
Okay, so even if they're asking for the gummy bears and that's their favorite thing and you did a preference assessment and they're saying that they want the gummy bears for it, what you have found is that if you change it up while you're giving the gummy bears are going to last longer essentially?
Mm-hmm. Okay. Kind of. I mean, it's not exactly that conclusive, but just overall that participants responded better when there was varied reinforcement.
Okay.
I don't know if it's because of the gummy bears lasting longer, but you know what I mean.
Yeah. I can see that being true for all of us. That makes a certain amount of sense. Because I've talked before about the slot machine mentality of things, which I know that is different, but I think that one of the reasons why people will stand so long in front of a slot machine is that there's the excitement of they don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
Because that most of the time you're going to lose, but occasionally you're going to win and you don't know what's going to happen. I think there is that level of excitement. And if you love gummy bears and you're doing something, I don't know why it's gummy bears for me today, but if you're doing something and you get a gummy bear and that's great, and then you do something else and you get a potato chip, which is wonderful but not great, there's that kind of that excitement of I'm going to get another gummy bear eventually, right?
Maybe. I'm not sure.
I don't know.
We don't really know the answer to that exactly. The study didn't look at that.
But it makes it more effective, is what you found.
Yeah.
So, okay, great.
And I want to respond to something that you said earlier.
Did I mess up?
And I don't have research to back this or anything. It's just a personal thought.
Okay.
You mentioned that if you've been eating a bunch of food or whatever, and then all of a sudden someone offers you something, you're not going to want it. But
Yeah.
have you ever noticed that you could go to a restaurant and you can eat until you're like completely full, but then when the dessert comes out, all of a sudden
Oh,
it's a new stimulus,
yes.
so now you're okay with it, kind of a thing?
yes.
The fact that you're full is like not that big a deal, but you definitely don't want any more of that other thing you were just eating
Right.
because you're very, very satiated on that in particular. So I think that also kind of like plays into the variation.
Okay.
Thing,
Yeah,
you know what
I
I
think
mean?
you're probably right. It's true that, you know,
And it might not necessarily be the feeling of being full. It's just of basically habituating to that item. That item is kind of
So
not new anymore.
you
know?
it's that new and novel thing. I think it's that level of excitement again, that whole thing of, oh, there's something new. It grabs our attention.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I think you're probably right that having it varied plays on a lot of different ways that our brain enjoys getting something.
And actually, in our field, some scientists argue about the whole satiation and deprivation thing and say that it doesn't exist, that it's really habituation and dishabituation that's happening.
Interesting.
Yeah. But that's a
Interesting.
whole like thing that was unnecessary. Basically, for
But
this
no, it's
show,
kind of fascinating. No, it's kind of fascinating too, because I think that one of the things that parents have a hard time with, I certainly did, was that if there was something my child loved, you know, then I wanted to be able to give that to him all the time. Because I was making up for other things emotionally, and you like to see your child happy. We don't like to take away the thing that they love, even for a period of time. It's not our favorite thing to be able to do. But I sort of love the idea that, you know, for my son, he wants to work for being able to have computer time and video game time and that kind of stuff. And he wants to do it on end. And what I'm taking away from this is that I need to kind of drive, well, you can play this game this amount of time and this game this amount of time, so that it's varied for him, because I think what I'll find is that he will be that much more excited about being able to do it. It will stay reinforcing longer.
Interesting.
I would guess that with him that would be the case if he was playing different, like in being on the computer for one thing and coming and being on, you know, the PlayStation for, not that I want him to be playing 8 hours a day.
Yeah, that's what I
Right.
was like, interesting, because I was
No.
thinking about, so do you want him to play video games
No.
a lot?
No,
But you're saying more
but-
like as a reinforcer for something? You don't want it to
Yes.
lose its value.
Yes, there have been times. That's the thing that he always asks for. If I do a preference assessment, I say, "What do you want to work for?" He wants for video game time. But there are times when there's something that I need him to do that I'll say, and I'll give you this amount of time doing this, and he'll say, "No, that's okay. I'll pass."
Like the
Right?
the reinforcer's not.
It's just not enough, right?
Valuable enough.
But if I were smart about it, and if I were changing up which game he could play at which time, I'll bet that wouldn't happen.
Perhaps.
I
Try
think
it.
I have to do a little
Let us
science
know.
experiment in my home now. All right, we should take a break, and then we're going to come back and talk with Dr. Nadowski a little bit more about EOs. So if I haven't completely confused you, we'll make sure that I confuse you. All right, stick with us.
Hello, fellow activists. Last week, we talked about step number 1, accept and embrace this challenge. Now we're moving on to step number 2, educate yourself. After my son Wyatt was diagnosed, I put up a sign over my home office that said Autism Central. I went to school in my home office every night after my husband and Wyatt had gone to bed, because I was determined to learn everything there was about autism. That's because knowledge is power. Visit all the autism websites you can, read all the books you can, learn about all the organizations that are out there that offer free guides to help you. Some of them even offer mentors to help guide you. Find out about local support services. Find out about what educational services your child is entitled to. Get to every autism conference and seminar you can. I'll never forget the first autism conference that I went to. The first speaker was a beautiful, brilliant woman named Dr. Doreen Graham-Pichet. She spoke about a therapy called Applied Behavioral Analysis, or ABA. She told about how it could improve the life of children with autism, and in some cases, recover them. Now, despite the fact that Wyatt had been diagnosed for over a year, nobody had told me about this therapy. I remember calling my husband on the cell phone and saying, "Honey, I met the woman who is going to help improve Wyatt's life." And I'm happy to say that 8 years later, that's true. Are you feeling a little overwhelmed by all the information that's out there? Well, you're not alone. But try different approaches for your child. Trust your gut. Just 40 short years ago, mothers were told if their child had autism that they would have to be institutionalized, and in some cases they were actually blamed for their child's autism for failing to bond with the child. That was called refrigerator mother syndrome. Well, thank goodness times have changed. So until next time, learn everything you can about autism and keep the faith.
Hi, welcome to Camp Discovery, a free-to-play suite of fun, interactive learning games for kids 2 and up, designed by experts in autism. Camp Discovery will open your early learner to a world of new skills, shapes, numbers, colors, locations, emotions, and more. Let's get started.
Please choose a level.
Objects. First, Camp Discovery's Intelligent Preference Assessment determines your child's preferred reward for choosing correctly. Okay, got it. Let's play. Camp Discovery creates a motivating learning environment for your child by minimizing incorrect responses and maximizing successful ones.
Find the shoes.
Respond correctly and your child is rewarded with their favorite animations.
You did it.
Respond incorrectly and our unique prompting system guides your child to the correct answer by making it the largest choice.
That's not it. Try again. Way to go.
Continue to answer correctly and the size gradually reduces until the child makes the correct choice independently.
You win.
Success! Rewards motivate learning. Complete a round and your child is rewarded with a fun mini-game. Track your child's progress with easy-to-read graphs. Multiple settings options allow you to customize Camp Discovery to your child's unique needs. All this in one single app, the Camp Discovery app, available for free on iTunes, Google Play, and Amazon Store.
Welcome back to Autism Live and to Real Progress with Dr. Adele. Dr. Adele Nadowski is here. And we've been talking about establishing operations, but now we want to talk a little bit about some questions that you guys have asked. So somebody wrote in and said, "Hi, thank you for your time. My 5-year-old lately is constantly making up words and not using his language like he usually can. How can I respond to him when he's telling me, 'Look, Mom, it's poopy,' instead of 'it's a ball,' or something like that, something of that nature?"
Okay. So it sounds like he has words, but he's using these other words. And to me, it's funny that your example is poopy, and it makes me wonder if that's common because at that age, that's pretty normal for kids to start engaging in potty humor. So it could just be some of that a little bit.
To see the reaction that he gets?
Yeah.
Okay. So it's an attention-seeking behavior.
Probably, if he really does know the names of the items.
Okay.
So one thing you could just simply try is not responding to it, and don't laugh or smile or look annoyed or anything else, and even turn away and go do something else. Don't give eye contact, and kind of act like if you can think of it like a light switch. When the behavior is right and good, you're right there and you're giving tons of attention, and when it's not, the switch goes off and you're doing something else.
Yeah.
But I think it's a normal phase that kids go through.
Yeah.
I actually still am dealing with that at home.
Really?
Yeah.
My son will say things to see if he can get my attention and get a reaction out of me, and it's very interesting how that works.
Yeah.
And I've been a little bit more aware of it lately too, saying I need to not, because sometimes I think it's hilarious, but it feeds the machine.
Yeah. If you think that actually he just doesn't know the names of the items and it's not what we're thinking, which is just kind of like a humor response, then just work on teaching him the names. So give him the name and have him repeat after you, basically, and continue to reinforce and praise that. And then if you can, try to fade out those prompts after a while. So you might first start by giving the full name and then slowly fade that back. So let's say, for example, that the item was ball. You might say, "It's a ball. Can you say ball?" And then he'll say ball. And then next time you might wait a couple seconds first to see if he can remember and say ball. And if he can't, then you might say ba, to kind of remind him what it is you're looking for. Or you might even just mouth it, like,
Right.
something like that. But the goal is to slowly remove that so that then he's saying the correct item names.
Okay, but just to put a fine point on it, we're not saying no, it's not poopy, it's a ball. That's too many words, right? So we don't even address, no, because seriously, the teacher would be like, no, it's not a ball. It's not a poopy, this is a ball. But that, I've been learning over the years, that's just way too many words when we're teaching language, that we just don't even address that. It's like you want to edit, you just want to highlight that part and take it and get rid of it.
It really depends on the kid. So if your kid you can just talk to normal and use full sentences, then great. But if not, then I would shorten it down to the least amount of information necessary.
Okay.
So I might just hold the ball up and say ball, and then when he says ball, give him a ton of reinforcement for that.
Okay, great. And then, you know what, do us a favor and let us know how that works. Because I always love to hear back how things are working. Okay, so another person wrote in and said, hi, thank you for your show. I've been an active viewer for over a year and so glad I found your show, and we're so glad you found us too. They go on to say, my son is turning 5 next month. He's in a typical preschool with no shadow. He attends half days with 20 hours of ABA. He has low, average, receptive, and expressive skills, but trouble with more conversational language and general questions. His preschool teacher at his school is saying he's having problems with answering what a story is about or who it's about. She also says he doesn't answer her at times. How do I help him at home with this? My speech therapist is going to give his teacher some visual aids to go with the story, and thanks for all that you do. We love this question. Okay, so what do you think, Dr. Nadowski?
Well,
There's a lot there.
I think visual aids are going to be helpful, probably in some ways, but I also think that being able to talk about a story is a huge leap when a child is low, average, and receptive and expressive. So I wouldn't jump to that next level. I would start with more beginning conversational type of skills.
Okay.
So you're saying that with receptive, those are listening skills. So you can tell the child something and they respond correctly, right? Mm-hmm. And then with expressive, I'm assuming what you mean is labeling things. So you might be able to ask what something is and they can label it. But from there, you need to start to expand the vocal responses that they're able to give and have them respond like not only to things that they're labeling, but to actual other vocalizations. Because if you think about it, with labeling, they're responding to the item that they see. Right. So there's actually like a visual item present that is non-vocal, and then you're asking them maybe like, what is it or something, right? Yeah. But then when you go to conversation, there is no item anymore. The only thing they're responding to now is your vocal. Yeah. That's kind of a big jump. So then to go to skip that and go straight into like reading a story. Yeah. Think about that. That's a huge leap. So you might just want to start with simple things that you can ask that will require them listening and then responding immediately to it. Okay, and teach those kind of responses.
So that's the conversational part of that. But and one of the reasons why I said there's a lot in there is because now I'm starting to think about all the different things that are going on. When we talk about in skills, when you're looking at a lesson, there's a part where it says prerequisites, and all the prerequisites and all the things that you just said. And I'm thinking about all the different things that this child has to have going on to be able to hear a story and then be able to
attention is a huge piece.
Oh my gosh.
Attention. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that they've got to be able to focus on the different parts of the story. Then saliency, they have to figure out what are the most important parts of the story, so that if it says, there's a dog with a red collar, that our kids might focus on the red collar but not the dog, right?
Think about this, is that they're doing the story and then they're asking questions like, who did blah, 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 and what, da, 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 da. So they're asking WH questions, what, who, when, why, where. Can your child even answer those questions without having to listen first to an entire story? Listening to a story requires actually like remembering the information. Yeah. So there's memory and sustained attention, and it's easy to just not pay attention and stuff like that.
Right.
So if you just give a very simple WH question, can they even distinguish between what, who, where, and why in certain situations? Yeah. Without having to first listen to a story.
Right. So it might be interesting.
I would work on those in isolation first.
Yes. So working on those kinds of lessons, and there are a whole bunch of lessons and skills that are the WH questions, and I think that's the name of the lesson is WH questions, that you could be working on with him at home. You definitely could be working on the conversation skills that you were talking about. It's possible that having the little pictures to help the teacher will be helpful. But But then we get into the whole thing about memory. There are lessons and skills
So I
that
would
would
work on
memory.
I would work on auditory memory, where they hear something and have to repeat it, and then I would maybe even add a delay a little bit in there, and lengthen the amount of stuff that they have to repeat. And then also paraphrasing. So you might like start with just saying like one sentence of the story, and then say, "What did I just say?" And they have to repeat it in their own words.
Right.
And then go to like 2 sentences. What did I just say? Because can they even answer a question if they can't even say what you said?
Right.
Right.
And you talked a little bit about attention, being able to focus attention on hearing a story. I find it fascinating that there are a lot of people who don't know how to read to kids. I just always, no, I'm sorry, and I don't mean to sound weirder, but there are people who don't know how to do early reading with kids and how to make it interactive. I love that we've moved on to iPads now, and that there are all kinds of interactive stories on iPads, and they can turn the page on the iPad, but there are things to do on the page. One of my favorite things, well before Usborne ever started doing this, was whenever I would read, and I was a good aunt long before I was a mom, right? That one of the tricks that I learned from somebody who taught reading comprehension is to start with very little kids and sit down with a book, and you read what's on the page, right? But then you have them point something out on the page. One of my favorite books, we've talked about it before on this show, is I'm Going on a Bear Hunt. Do you know this book from when your kids were little? Mm-hmm. Oh, it's such a great book. And it says, we're going on a bear hunt, and they come across a problem, and they say, there's a big mud field, we can't go over it, we can't go under it, we have to go through it, right? But there's a baby in the story, and there's a dog in the baby, and every time I would turn a page, we would read the thing, and I would say, "Where's the baby?" And then they have to point and find the baby, and I'd say, "And where's the dog?" So that they had to point. Now, Usborne, if you find their books, they have a little duck on every single page, so you read what's on the page, and then they have to find the duck that's hidden somewhere on the page. It keeps them engaged. It's exciting. They know they're going to turn the page, and it's after the stage, after where there's the textures and the things to push on the books, but keeping them involved in and staying involved with what's happening in the story. So part of me wants to know is the preschool teacher reading books in a way that keeps attention going? And if not, can you do that at home to keep building the amount of time that he can sustain energy in reading a book? What
I would just start small, start with one sentence, and then get a question answered off that one sentence, and then go to 2 sentences and answer a question off that. And if at some point it fails and falls apart at 3 sentences, then now do paraphrasing too.
Yeah.
And then ask the questions,
And keep it exciting. Keep it, so that it's not all dry and go, Joey walked down the street with his dog, and say, who was walking down the street?
That makes another point, which is like use their favorite characters and things like that, and get stuff that they're interested in.
It's got to be reinforcing for them. I don't know anybody that became a reader and got excited about reading
with a boring book.
With a boring book. It's true. There's always like one book that you can go back and say, when did you read a book that got you excited about reading another book? So make it as exciting as you can, and find books that, to start with, that your child will get excited about.
Yeah.
Later on, there's other things that you can worry about with reading comprehension, but getting this little guy to the point where he's got all the skills to be able to meet that moment where the teacher wants to know who the story is about.
Right.
It's a lot.
Yeah.
It's an absolute lot. But again, check out Skills, because there are a lot of these lessons available to you in Skills. Anything else we want to add to that?
I don't think so.
All right, we're out of time. So we thank you so much for being here and elucidating for us always these things that help us to get to good progress. We appreciate you.
Oh, thank you.
We don't have you next week, but we will have you the week after, and so we'll look forward to seeing you then. We're going to take a break now and go to the A Word. This is an ongoing documentary being made at the Center for Autism and Related Disorders following a little boy, Jack Riley, who was diagnosed with autism at age of 2. At this point in the story, and it's real people, real family going into their home. We're seeing them the first week that they started therapy. So it's fascinating to watch them go, okay, this is our new reality, these people coming in and running these lessons with our child. What is this going to be like? So take a look. This is the A Word.
therapy, that one-on-one, when kids have been in an environment where no one understands them, and then you finally put them in an environment where they understand all the consequences, of where they see, oh, you know, if they did something that was supposed to be done, they get reinforced for it.
Say, yeah, there we go. Good job.
For the first time, kids like him start to understand kind of interaction, because it's made very clear in therapy. We'll start just like all therapy, which is we start with compliance.
Do this. Good job. It's your turn.
Really working on getting him to listen to us, listen to a few directions like stand up or come here.
This is come here. All right, bud? Hey, try by yourself, okay? Come here. All right, you did it. Good job. See, that was so easy.
The idea is that we had to get his attention first. And once you get a good foundation of compliance, then his therapy would be a combination of at the table, where it's very clear and succinct language, combined with just more play.
You say, what is that? Banana, that's right. Banana. What else do you see? Carrots. Good talking.
Then we look at language, making sure that he can make his desired requests and needs met, getting him to figure out that, hey, I'm learning these words, and these words are actually useful. It teaches them the idea of communication and not using another person as a tool.
Okay, sure. There you go.
And then also what's important to the family. You know, what behaviors or what areas of focus do they need help with?
One goal, I don't know how we're going to get there, but one of the things I've noticed that's different about him is I'll see a 2-year-old in one of our little restaurants that we can take him, and the kid just feeds himself lunch. Now Jack feeds himself pancakes, he feeds himself applesauce, but most everything else we have to feed him, and I'm really looking forward to the day where he just eats.
Okay, so that's banana by a spoon. He likes the taste of banana. He doesn't mind the texture in his mouth, but when you get the visual into it, he gets very upset. So it just strikes me that it's all behavior.
He's playing defensive ball right now.
And there was banana in that yogurt too, so he eats it every day. And he gets so upset, so offended.
I think a lot of his issues with eating have developed into behavioral issues. I think he may have had texture issues, and I think he probably still has a lot of sensory issues, but I think a lot of it now is habit.
I think for Jack Riley, he was very tactile defensive in his mouth. He just doesn't like the feeling of it. And then it moves into a routine. It moves into the rigidity of autism, where they only want to eat certain things. They like what is familiar, and they like to do the same things over and over. And I think the fact that he's not eating food where he really has to chew, that's going to affect his oral motor development, which will affect his language and how clear he is. Getting some of that muscle development going in his face and his mouth, because you're going to have to use a lot of those muscles to be able to make sounds and make words.
What are you doing, kiddo? So silly.
It is Thursday night. Day 2 of our official ABA services have kicked in, and we are getting ready for bed. We run our energies off at night before bedtime. After the intensity of ABA, it's shocking that he has any energy. We think he'll sleep very well tonight. They're definitely pushing him to say sounds and do things he's not used to doing. He had a few meltdowns, and he did okay. He's gonna be so smart.
Bye-bye.
Facts, autism journey questions and answers that help you get down the path in your autism journey faster, easier, like the Superman that you need to be, or Supergirl. But on a serious note, one of the most common questions that I get is, what do I do when my child is a non-responder to therapeutics and medical intervention? If you have a child that's a non-responder, know this, and if you've been on the journey for a long time, there's been more research in treatments for autism since 2005 than all previous years combined. So my first recommendation for a kid, for a family that has a kid with a non-responding issue to treatments, therapies, and medical intervention, is to reevaluate the treatments that are available. Start with the basics. Go back and revisit a MAPS doctor. Get all of that baseline testing, or a good neuropsych if you need to look at the therapeutics. Start with the baseline. The second thing families need to know when they are dealing with a child that has non-responder issues is really you're going to have to scale up. And I mean scale up the time you're spending with your resources to figure out and really become the Sherlock Holmes to understanding what is going on, what is impeding progress, why aren't things moving forward. You really need to make sure that you have a current MRI and a current EEG. Those two tests are so extremely valuable. Often they will provide clues as to what is going on and what treatments that really could help your child make the best progress they can make. Hey, there's another frequently asked question. Wish I had my magic fairy wand so everybody was a responder. It's in the shop. Maybe I'll get it next time when we get together and talk about Facts. We'll see you soon.
Welcome back to Autism Live. We had a question that came in just as Dr. Nadowski was leaving, but I had a chance during the break, and that's why the break was a little bit longer. She needed to rush, but want to read this. Hi, Shannon and Dr. Nadowski. My 10-year-old is on the spectrum, and we are a card family going through ABA. My question is, how do we get through non-compliance when time is of the essence? Boy, isn't that always the thing, right? My son usually has trouble getting up, but we can get through this most mornings now. But on rare days, like today, that I cannot get any compliance from him, what can I do? Normally I'll run through the usual steps of trying to find out what is bothering him when it seems obvious to me that something is. And rewards like iPad time before school or his favorite breakfast isn't motivating him. I feel horrible because now we're rushing to get him and his little brother to school, and I'll get to that shouty mom phase. Oh, don't I know about that phase? And I don't like being at that, she writes, and I don't either. Love listening to you guys, and thanks for everything. And she went on to say, I always try waking him up by 6:15 because I know it's going to take him at least half an hour to get out of bed. So I was able to talk with Dr. Nadowski about this, and what I loved is that she answered literally, what do you do when you're in that moment and you're not getting the compliance and time is at the issue? And she asked me to talk to you about 3-step guided compliance. And we talked a little bit, she and I, about the fact that research has shown that when parents do this 3-step guided compliance, that it's very effective. So step 1 is that you give a vocal instruction. So that you say to your child, you need to get up. And then you wait for 5 seconds, and you want to stay as neutral as possible, and you say, get up, and you, neutral as possible, wait the 5 seconds, and then if they haven't complied after the 5 seconds, you then model the behavior for them. So in this case, if the thing is get up out of bed, you're saying you need to get up like this, and you literally are going to mime it. You don't necessarily need to get in the bed, but you're showing them you need to get up like this, and actually, make it look like you're doing the behavior. You wait 5 seconds again, and again, you're being neutral and not being wop, 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 get up kind of thing, right? You're just being neutral. And then if the 5 seconds goes by and they don't do it, then you are going to physically prompt them to do that. That means you are going to motor them through that. It is unpleasant for you, it is unpleasant for them, and if you stay neutral while you're doing it, it doesn't need to get aggressive at all. You're being very gentle about it, but you're motoring them out of the bed and saying, we're getting up out of bed, talking to them, just about we're getting up like this, and if you follow through with this, and then as soon as they have accomplished that, you give the next instruction. So if you've gotten them up out of bed and you now want them to walk to the bathroom, you would give the next instruction and say, walk to the bathroom, and if they don't do it, you wait the 5 seconds, and then it sounds ridiculous, but I can remember doing this too. You say, no, we want to walk to the bathroom like this, and you're modeling the behavior. They don't do it, you're waiting the 5 seconds, then you are motoring them. We're walking to the bathroom, and if you have to, you're moving their legs to get them to go. If we do this as parents, what happens is that the children, we set a standard. They don't like the third one. They don't like to be motored. We're not hurting them when we're doing it, but they don't like to be motored. Do you? I don't. And what they will start to do is whenever we get into this compliance mode, they recognize the second step. When we're modeling the behavior, they recognize what's coming. And she was saying that research shows that very quickly kids get it together and compliance shoots up because they don't want to get to step 3. It's just unpleasant for them, and they will do a lot to avoid it. And by us signaling, giving the instruction and staying neutral, and she says when they do it, make sure that you're providing tons of praise and reinforcement. But if we're staying neutral, we give so step 1, vocal instruction, wait 5 seconds. Step 2, model the behavior, wait 5 seconds. Step 3, you motor them through it. You're physically prompting them through whatever the thing was that you do. We do not allow escape for it. Nothing happens that prevents the motoring through. And then as soon as they've motored through it, we give the next instruction for the next thing, and very quickly they will get on board. So I absolutely love that. Love that she went through the time to explain that to me so that I could explain it to you. We'll have Dr. Tarbox in a minute, and he can tell us if I left anything out. I will say, too, that different kids, different things, that's for when you're already in the moment. But I think that there are lots of things that you can think of, since EO is our thing today. There are lots of things that you can do beforehand that can sometimes make that whole morning routine just so different. We started something when Jem was little that he loves to race. That's the thing that he loves to do. So we made anything that we needed fluency on, or anything that had a time element to it, into a race. I couldn't get him to get out of the car and walk up the sidewalk. We were in a condo, and I would have all these groceries that I would have to carry up this very long walk and up the steps to our condo, and I would have this little boy who was an escape risk, right? And I was afraid he would run into the street while I was holding the groceries. So what I would say to him is, we're going to have a race to the front door. So the minute I would get him, and I would say, you have to be waiting on the starting line. And he would wait on this one little place. I would get the groceries out. I would have the groceries, and I would get to the starting line, and I would say, go. And he would race to get up the door. It was so much easier than arguing with him about, come on, please, don't run that way, dropping the groceries, and worrying about, was he going to run out into traffic? Because that was something that was exciting to him. And we applied the same thing to the morning routine when he started school, because he didn't want to wake up. And so we would do, every morning, one of us would race him to the bathroom. We would say, okay, I'm going to race without you. I'm going to race to the bathroom. And if I get there first, he didn't even care what the thing was that you got if you raced. He just wanted to be in the race, and he wanted to win, because that was exciting when he won the race. I can still do that at the age of 11 now, that sometimes I can say, all right, I'm going to beat you to the bathroom. I'm going to get there first, and he'll come flying out of bed. But we set it up so that getting up out of bed was something that was exciting, and that there was a reason to be praised, and that there was something to look forward to. Now, I don't very often do the thing where it's a race to the bathroom, but I do the same little sing-song thing every morning that I say to him, the shower, because he takes a shower every morning, and I say, the shower's warm, and if you don't hurry, the water's going to turn cold. And it's, I do this whole thing. I don't want to sing for you, but I do this whole little song that he knows is going to happen, and that he's going to get up and he's going to get a bunch of praise. So you can be putting those things in there too, but if you're not getting it, I love Dr. Nadowski's 3-step guided compliance. Hope that helps you guys. All right, we're going to take a break, and then we're going to bring Dr. Tarbox in here, and he can clean up anything that I got wrong, so stick with us.
Hi, I'm Ryan with Autism Research Group. We study ways to improve the lives of kids with autism. One of those ways is teaching safety skills, such as what to do if they get lost. We hit the streets to find out if anybody knows the correct answer on how to teach a kid what to do if they get lost. You're teaching a child
what to do if they get lost.
Yeah, you're trying to make them independent, so they have the skills.
Gotcha. Okay.
Well, give them a compass.
Code name's good idea, Centurion.
We always have this whistle.
Oh, I'd also tell the kid, don't get scared. You're gonna be all right, man. This is just the world. This is planet Earth. You're at home here. As long as you're on planet Earth, you're at home.
As long as you're on planet Earth, you're home. This guy's a genius. With that flawless logic, he just solved our homeless problem. And as for the unique sounding whistle, although very cool, it'll probably only work if you're in close proximity. And a compass.
I have her call me.
Yeah, she doesn't have a phone. Parents are like, you're too young, you don't need a phone.
Establish some sort of like meeting place.
What if they can't find a meeting place? Because sometimes the kids get nervous when they get lost.
Yeah.
So like a backup plan,
Well,
plan B.
Yeah, I don't know. No, not really.
Let them go and find a new kid or something.
Yeah, I got a different one. Yeah.
There's not much you can do.
There is stuff you can do.
That's right, there is stuff you can do. In 2012, myself, along with my colleagues, Dr. Jonathan Tarbox and Dr. Adele published a study in the Journal of Applied Behavior Analysis on teaching kids what to do when they get lost. The study demonstrated how 3 simple things, rules, role-playing, and praise, were effective in establishing these help-seeking behaviors. The benefit of this method is it doesn't require the child to have a cell phone or to have to locate a meeting place, which might be difficult if they're in a place like Disneyland. So once again, our method included rules, role-playing, and praise. Let's head back outside and learn about some of these rules.
They should yell out loud. Can't find my mom, help me.
Maybe yell out and scream for help.
All right. Scream really loud.
Correct.
And if that doesn't work, then,
I don't know.
well, they could seek help from someone.
Find an adult.
Yeah, go to a vendor, you know, and say I'm lost.
Find an adult, like a police officer or a fireman or an employee in the store, and tell them, and maybe they can help you contact your parent.
It really is that simple. You don't need to get your kid a cell phone. You don't need to establish a meeting place that they might not be able to find when they're lost and panicking. And you definitely don't need to give them a compass. All your kid has to do is 3 things. First, yell mom or dad real loud. 2, if that doesn't work, find an employee. And then 3rd, tell the employee they're lost. If they can't locate an employee, then tell them to find a mother with children, because that's probably the safest person to approach. I'm not saying that most men are predators, but most predators are men. That is a fact. I've read it in a fortune cookie. All right, so you've gone over the rules with your kid, and you've quizzed them, and they're able to tell you the correct responses so they understand the rules. But is that enough? How do you know they're gonna perform correctly in a real world setting? You need to get out there and find out if they can actually do it.
So you'd go over the rules and tell them, like, do this, do that, but how would you know if they actually knew what to do? If you wanted to shoot a basketball, and I just told you, oh, when you shoot a basketball, do this, this, and this.
But never practice.
You never practice, yeah, so it doesn't matter how many times we go over the rules or how well you can repeat them back to me. It's not going to change until you get on the court and practice.
Maybe do like a, a little skit with them.
Like a role play?
Role play, yeah.
Your child, you're lost in the toy aisle.
Okay.
What do you do? I'm an attendant, walking around.
I'm lost, I don't know where my mom is.
And then once you practice, you just like praise them, give them feedback, like, good job, you did it.
Reinforcing it.
Yes, this woman wins the prize for best comment. She pointed out the most important part of learning, reinforcement. Now, in our study, we used praise, but for your kid, you might have to use something else. You might have to buy them a treat, a toy, take them to their favorite restaurant where they can eat unhealthy food, and run around and climb through plastic tunnels that have the unmistakable scent of urine, and then play games, spending $20 to get a plastic little spider ring that they will eventually lose in the ball pit. The point is, you need to reward your child for correctly demonstrating what you've been teaching them.
Okay, I'm gonna call her. Hello, your child, Ryan Oceans is missing. There you go.
Woohoo!
Yay!
So you tested it out
I'll
in the
try.
store to make sure I knew it. I had the rules, we role played it, and you made sure I knew it, and then like you said, good job, and all that. Now we're good to go.
We're good to go.
All right.
Done?
High five right there.
Yeah.
So there you have it. Give your child the rules, get out there and practice, and reward your child for responding correctly. For more information, please visit us online at autismresearchgroup.org. I'm Ryan Bergstrom. Thanks for watching. Yes, ding, no. Yes, this woman wins the first. Yes, this woman. Yes, this woman wins the best. Yes, this woman wins the first place. Yes, this woman with. Why can't I say woman? Yes, this woman wins. What's the line? Yes!
Welcome back to Autism Live. Look who I found. Dr. Jonathan Tarbox is here with us. So thrilled that we have you. You know, I say there's no better way to end the week than to end with you.
Thank you. I
for
appreciate
people
that.
who don't know Dr. Tarbox, he is an amazing individual. He has a beautiful brain. He is the head of research and development for the Center for Autism and Related Disorders. He's the director of the Autism Research Group. He is an individual who works with individuals on the autism spectrum and has for a very long time, a wonderful expert. And our parents really know and relate to you because you put things in terms that we can understand and get our arms wrapped around.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Well, we appreciate it. Are you kidding me? So I'm just going to start with a question. They said hello and congrats on your new edition.
Hey, all right. That's great. I love it. Thank you very much.
Yes. They said, my 5-year-old has 25 hours of approved ABA, but is getting 12 hours because we can't find assistants. We have 4 assistants. I feel like this is too many assistants. They do all have experience, but is this too many assistants? I have someone I have found on my own that has some teaching background, but no ABA experience. She can give me 15 hours. I need some advice to make this important decision. What are your thoughts? Should I lean towards dropping the assistants that can't give me more hours, or what kinds of things should I consider? My son attends a typical preschool for 15 hours, so we have the time at home.
Great.
Thanks so much for your thoughts on this area. And I love this. You know, we always talk about therapists, and I forget that sometimes people around the country use different terms for it. So
Right.
I just want to point out that when it is my assumption when you're talking about assistants that you're talking about those basic therapists that aren't supervisors, they're not
Entry-level folks that work directly with the kid. Yeah, there's actually a lot of different terms at all the different organizations I've worked at around the country. They call them, some places call them teachers, some places call them tutors, some places call them technicians, which sounds kind of dry. Mediators. There's all kinds of funny terms for them. Coaches, instructors, therapists, you name it. So that's what it sounds like she's talking about. Yeah.
Yes.
And I guess the major question here is, given about 25. First of all, congratulations on getting 25 hours a week funded for your child. That's good. You're in that lower end of high intensity, which is good. The question is sort of what's the ideal number of therapists or tutors or assistants to have given 25 hours a week? And do you want to keep an assistant who really can't honestly commit to very many hours per week?
Right.
Really important questions. And those are questions, by the way, that every ABA agency who hires these folks deals with every day. Usually and there's no, of course, like everything else in ABA, there's no golden rule or standard answer, but sort of some rules of thumb. One is, I generally think that an entry-level therapist, if they can only see your child once a week for about 2 hours or 3 hours, that's usually not enough time for them to build a relationship with your child and to become an expert on your child's treatment. And that's what we're doing with therapists. We're making each therapist an expert on how to interact with your child. That's the point of ABA. Now, so maybe if they could attend 2 weekly sessions with your child, maybe 2 sessions, each session is 2 to 3 hours, that's maybe kind of the minimum, I would say.
Okay.
Now, more seasoned therapists, like a senior therapist, we call them sometimes, a lot of times they will only see a child once a week for 2 or 3 hours, but that's because they have a couple years history becoming really good ABA therapists, and they're helping kind of oversee the other therapists, and so that's adequate. But for entry-level folks, really 2 hours a week, not enough. I usually say probably more like 4 to 5 to 6 hours a week minimum per person.
Okay.
But ideally, you want to go for more than that. Now, that being said, you don't want just one person, right? So you might find one really energetic person that could do all 25 hours, and you might think, oh, great, no scheduling issues, no nothing. That's also not good for generalization, which we talk about on your show all the time. So an ideal balance, again, it's going to depend on the kid, depend on the therapist, but I would shoot for maybe 3 or 4 different therapists for a 25-hour-a-week program. Can you do 5? Yeah, but that would be the absolute max, I would say. And honestly, it's going to get difficult in terms of just coordination and scheduling. You're going to spend so much time just making sure everyone's on the same page that it's not the most efficient way to do it. So what I would do is, if it was my kid or my agency where I'm trying to staff this child, I would just go overtime on recruiting therapists, recruiting new people that can commit at least, let's say, 6 to 10 hours a week. Like if you could have 3 therapists, 10, 10, and 5 hours or something like that,
Right.
or 7, 7, and 9, or 11, or whatever, would really be perfect. So maybe keep the ones you have right now, train them to the best extent possible, but at the same time recruit therapists that can give you more hours. And honestly, when you find someone good that can give you 10 hours, it's okay to let one of the other ones go that can only give you 4 or 5 hours.
Okay.
I mean, it's going to be hard. You've built a relationship with them and you're going to feel bad, but priority one is your child getting the highest quality treatment possible,
right.
and consistency is a really big factor there.
Okay, so the other person that she found that doesn't have ABA experience but has an educational background that can give her 15 hours, I love the idea of getting that person trained in ABA.
Absolutely.
But that's going to take a little bit of time, so maybe not let go of those other therapists until they can ramp up to have that person.
Yeah, and research has shown very clearly that you don't need any background at all in ABA to be trained to be a good ABA therapist. Okay?
Right.
So like the original outcome studies, it was all college students. They didn't even have a bachelor's degree. They had no prior experience, and they were just trained really well.
Yeah.
And then they were put on the kids' cases. So that's that's totally possible. It's just a matter of getting a good quality BCBA to do the training for that 15-hour-a-week person. You can't just throw them in and show them a couple videos, read a couple books. They need training and direct mentorship and supervision by someone who's already an expert.
And I always like to point out that there was a day that you didn't know anything about ABA, and it was a day that somebody was hiring you to work with an individual with autism.
About 12 hours a week.
Right.
In a home.
And when I think about that, I want to find that mom and hug her.
I do too. I've looked for her actually, and I can't say her name on the show obviously because it would be breaking confidentiality. But I've looked for her, and if you're watching the show, reach out because I really would like to hear how you're doing.
I want to
and
send her a
doing.
Mother's Day card.
Yeah.
Because look at how she changed the world.
I know,
and
absolutely.
you could be that mom too. You could be hiring the next Jonathan Tarbox, right? I mean, it's kind of an amazing thing. It gives me all kinds of hope. Now, something you said, I want to cycle back to because I hear stories all the time, and we might actually have differing opinions on this, which would be so interesting.
It could even be the first time.
It could be the first time.
Let me have it.
Okay, so I hear a lot of times that it happens in all ABA programs that you've got a therapist who's scheduled to come at a certain time, and for whatever reason they can't. They get sick, they blow a tire, their mom gets sick, whatever happens, and they cannot be there. You've got a certain number of hours that you have funding for the week, and you're faced with this moment of choosing between, do I let those hours go because I can't reschedule this person to come another time, or do I take a fill-in, somebody who isn't going to get another opportunity probably for a while or ever to see my child, somebody who doesn't know my child, who's going to come, and that session's going to look vastly different than it would have looked like if you'd had that therapist who's on your case. So do I let that time go and just chalk it up to nothing, or do I take that time? And I hear parents all the time who cancel and say, well, if I can't have this therapist, then I'm not going to do that therapy. And I'm the one who's always saying, don't do that.
Right.
That's an opportunity, and there are some things that can happen in that session that, just like there are some things that aren't going to happen in that session that would have happened in the other, there are some things that could happen in that session that wouldn't have happened in the other.
Absolutely. So no, we don't disagree.
Oh, good. I'm glad.
But I would like to add to that is the first thing you should do in that situation is work overtime to try to just reschedule those hours with that therapist. Do whatever it takes to open up your schedule, be flexible. If that's not possible, and sometimes it's not possible, right? If it's not possible, then 9 times out of 10, I would say take that fill-in therapist.
Yep.
But the reason why that fill-in therapist is going to be successful is because the supervisor, the BCBA, has set things up beforehand for them to be successful. So there should be like a maintenance book or a generalization book or materials or some kind of instructions or even an email sent to the therapist to tell that therapist what to do with that kid, because they're not going to have all their lessons memorized. But every kid in every ABA program has learned something in the past, and it's really important that a new person tests out whether they can still do that stuff.
Absolutely.
And that's called maintenance and generalization testing, and it's really critical. In fact, we never do enough of that in ABA programs.
Exactly. You don't have enough opportunity to do that, and I know as a parent, sometimes it feels like a loss, like, oh no, we were going to work on whatever. But there are things that have to be done every once in a while, because every once in a while our kid will lose part of a skill or all of a skill, and we need to keep massaging that, and making sure that we're keeping up on it. But I also think too, for people who think, And it addresses a little bit what you had mentioned before about generalization, that this parent saying, I think 4 is too many people. But if you stop and think about it, if you only have 2 people on the team, what happens invariably is that your child gets used to answering their instruction.
Absolutely.
And then all of a sudden you're in line at Target, and I use this example always because that's what happened to me, the light bulb went off, was that we were trying to teach Jem to answer the question, what's your name? And he had his therapist that would come in, and we probably had 4 therapists, right? And they would all sound a little bit different, and they would all say it a little bit different because we want them to. But he had learned that they do this, and I say, my name is Jem. And it was a very sheltered environment, but there we are at Target, and he's in the little cart, and the lady behind the counter goes, oh, well, look at this little lovey. Honey, sweetheart, what's your name? And he looked at her like, for a second, like, I have no idea who you are, and looked off at something else.
Even though he knows what's your name, right?
Right.
But he hadn't received the generalization training that it's going to be presented very differently.
Yeah.
Or tell me your name, or do you know your name?
Right.
Or,
Right. Just totally like, nothing happened. And anytime we get somebody who's trained, and this woman wasn't trained in ABA, so she gave up.
Right.
And over the years I learned to prompt and say to them, can you ask that again just exactly the way you asked before? And they go, what? Right? But you don't have to do that with a fill-in.
Right.
The fill-in's going to ask in an entirely different way, and they're going to keep on and reinforce and reinforce and reinforce because they know ABA.
That's right.
The lady at the check stand at Target doesn't.
Right.
Which, if I could change that,
that's my next
wouldn't
project.
that be great? If we could make everybody understand?
We should also add on, there are some times when it's not appropriate to get a fill-in who's not trained on your child. And so some of those times are if your child's still struggling with severe challenging behavior, so if you're having regular tantrums, aggression, self-injurious behavior that's pretty severe still, so we're still sort of getting through that extinction burst, that's not the right time to introduce a new therapist who hasn't been directly trained on your child's team, because they're going to have a tough time, and the kid's going to have a tough time, and so on. There's other times when the type of programming that you're doing with your child is so much different and so much more advanced, or so idiosyncratic and so different from what's normally done with other kids of that agency, that honestly the therapists aren't ready unless they've had specific training. So there are some times for that. But the percentage of you folks who are watching and listening who your kid is pretty low. It's definitely less than 10%.
And I will say this, there were times that we had a fill-in that would come, and I would say to them, all I want you to do during this session is to play and interact with my child and get him to be making eye contact and responding to you. I don't want you to work on anything else.
I was just about to say exactly that. Because think about it, even if all the fill-in does is build rapport with your child and pair reinforcement with social interactions, that's got to be better than whatever else your kid would have been doing during those empty hours. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's building more social rapport with more human beings. And that's such a huge piece of what we do.
And I would think in terms of long-term, what is this going to help him with, down the road? And I see the social bee that my son is, and he has no compunction with talking to a stranger. We take him to most events. If you guys ever come to an event that we're at, we do take him to most events. And I know I can give him the job of handing out flyers. He does it so much better than I does. He'll say, here's a flyer for a show. You need to watch this show. That's my mom. She hosts the show.
I gotta
you can ask Kelby. It's
great.
like, we like at the Autism Walk towards the end of the big LA Autism Walk, we always have flyers as the runners are coming back that we'll give to them. And I can give a stack to every person that we have at the booth. Sometimes we have sorority girls, we have parents, I have staff that are there and they're handing out, and I can hand 50, Emily, who is fearless and can talk to anybody. Emily is, incredibly, I give her a stack of 100, I give Jem 150, and he'd be back in 5 minutes, and Emily's like, I don't know how he does that. But, he could hand out 3 times as many as she could.
That's great.
And make a connection with the people while they were doing it. And he'd say, it's about autism. You need to watch this show. Check it out. And I think that part of that came from occasionally having people that he didn't know.
Right.
And
sure.
And each phase along the way, each phase along the way, it had its benefits to it. It had benefits for us. I got to the point where I could convey to people, this is what we're working on, and if you can't say what your child is working on, figure out the way to be able to say that, to be able to convey. Your funding sources are going to ask you at some point, and you don't need to be cramming the night before. So I think it's a big benefit.
So
don't cancel those
think of it as a challenge. And yes, it will be stressful, but it will have benefits.
I definitely think so. I definitely think so. I encourage you to use your fill-in time. Okay, we had a question that came in about this 3-step compliance strategy. They said, "Hi Shannon, learning from the 10-year-old 3-step compliance strategy. Thanks to the mom who asked the question." I love it when somebody asks a question that we've never thought to ask, and you hear something, you go, "Hey, I like that." She says, "Do we tell the child about the 3 steps ahead of time, maybe the night before? And thank you for the great information."
Yeah, and I would say, you know, I love that your viewers are asking about that. Is I always ask myself every time I'm working with a family and working with a kid, how much language is appropriate about what we're going to do? Like, how much should we talk to the child about what we're going to do?
Yeah.
And I would say, just sort of ethically, it's better to err on the side of a little too much than a little too little, right?
I like that.
Just because, you know, we want to give the child as much self-determination and as much dignity as possible. We're not about bossing people around and controlling people. So if it's possible for us to help the child understand why we're doing what we're doing with them, then we should always do that. That being said, you don't want to overdo it and, you know, spend 20 minutes arguing, lecturing, convincing, blah, 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 blah. And you definitely don't want to do all of that as a consequence of the child misbehaving, right? But beforehand, before you start it, if you want to sit down and say, "Look, here's the deal. Like, you know, when I ask you to do something, I'm going to need you to do it. You know, that's because mommy's the boss, and you know it's okay. And you know, I'm proud of you, and I trust. I know you can do it. You're a big boy, and I want you to be independent. So I'm going to let you do it all by yourself. Okay. If it's hard or if you don't want to, then I'll show you. Okay. And then you really need to do it. And if you don't do it, I'm gonna help you do it.
Right.
And that's about all. And if they have a question or two about it, that's fine, explain it. And then that's about all the talking that needs to happen. After that, the procedure explains itself.
I love that, because you don't want to paint it and say the part that's the secret amongst us, which is, and you're really not going to like it when I show you how to do it. We don't need to tell them that, right?
Don't make it
I always
negative.
want to quantify things and go, and this is a good thing and this is a bad thing. And what I've learned over the years is that nothing is good, nothing is bad. It's how we perceive it, right?
Absolutely.
So don't tell them how they should perceive it. They'll get it on their own.
Yeah.
Let them make the leap.
Or do try to paint it in a positive way.
Right.
Like, this is a way to help you be more independent, so I don't have to boss you around all the time.
Right.
You know?
That's my motive.
They probably won't buy it, but you know, that's a healthy way for them to perceive it.
But they probably will have a pretty quick allergic reaction to it.
Probably,
all right.
yeah.
We are going to take a short break, and then we're going to be back with more of Dr. Jonathan Tarbox answering your questions after these messages. Stick with us. There's been another new study about optimal outcomes, and I wanted to know, what are your thoughts on recovery? Do you think it's possible? Do you believe in recovery from autism?
On recovery, you learn how to adapt. I mean, I've had a lot of experimental brain scans done, and they have found things that are definitely abnormal. I have an enlarged left ventricle that's definitely abnormal. That's not going to go away. That scan was done less than 5 years ago. But you work with someone and they adapt. You're not going to make me an algebra specialist. That's just not going to happen. But things like getting better at public speaking, that is something that I gradually learned. What I'm seeing today, especially with some of the kids on the mild end of the spectrum, I'm seeing teenagers that are much milder than me that haven't learned things like how to go up to the counter at McDonald's and order food all by themselves, how to go on the bus, how to shop, how to go in the store and shop, how to do a checkbook, basic things like that. Because what drives me crazy is when I go back to the cattle world and I see a guy in the maintenance shop that's running the whole maintenance shop at a big plant, and he's as Asperger's as he can be, and he's running the whole maintenance shop. And then I see Junior that's addicted to video games, and you can't get his duff off his chair and get him doing things. Now, when I was in high school, I did a lot of thinking about this. I got kicked out of a large girls' school for throwing a book, and I went to a special boarding school up on a farm, and I was allowed to work with the farm animals. And they let me goof off and not study. But I got to thinking, there's one thing they did not let me do. I goofed off and I didn't study, but I had to physically go to class. When I didn't want to go to the Friday night movie, they made me the projectionist. One thing they were not going to let me do is sit in my room, become a recluse in my room. They were not going to allow that.
I want to know why you threw the book. Why did you throw it?
Oh, I threw a book at a girl because she called me a retard.
Oh, good reason.
Oh, no,
to throw
she
it
teased me. And I had some problems getting in fights when kids teased me. But it was always brought about by someone picking on me. And the principal had me kicked out of school, out of a large girls' school for doing that.
And what'd your mom say?
Well, she was not very happy about the whole thing, because when the principal called, I answered the phone and he said I was incorrigible and I was kicked out of school. Mother was really angry that he just said that right directly to me, which was definitely not very appropriate.
Welcome back to Autism Live. We're here with the fabulous and wonderful Dr. Jonathan Tarbox. He is answering your questions in real time. We appreciate him for that. Okay, somebody writes in and says, I just noticed my 14-year-old often replies to questions not directed to him. Many times we say his sister's name before the question. Sometimes it's pretty clear we're not talking to him. Why is this, and how do we teach him? And thank you. Appreciate all the momentum you give by your teaching and sharing. So wonderful. So what do we think here, Dr. Tarbox?
Yeah, so I actually see that all the time. I see it really frequently with higher function agers and young, tweens. It turns out it's a subtle social skill to detect who exactly someone is intending to speak to. When you think about it, it's not based on volume, because there could be multiple people in the room and the volume's loud enough for everyone to hear. So you can't detect it on volume. You can't always detect it based on eye contact, because I might be digging through my backpack and say something that's intended for my sister, not my mom. You know what I mean?
Yes, I do.
So it's really tricky. Sometimes it's sort of prosody or intonation, sort of the sing-songy quality of your voice. It could, and sometimes you're not talking to anybody. You're just exclaiming something like, "Oh, I can't find,"
Right.
And a lot of times folks on the spectrum will say, "Well, what do you mean?" Well, actually, I was just complaining. I wasn't talking to anybody.
You're describing my entire household. Is what you're describing. This is us always.
So we see this all the time, and it's one of those subtle social skills that's actually, I have to say, actually kind of hard to teach, but it is teachable. And the way that I would approach it is the same as everything else in ABA, which is break it down into smaller pieces and approach it lightly and make it positive. Don't make it a negative thing. What I would not do is what is our natural tendency, which is kind of nagging. So like every time the person does that, as a consequence, you go, "I wasn't talking to you."
Right.
Okay. You can try that. She's probably already tried it. It doesn't work. It's just kind of frustrating, and it makes the interaction more negative for everybody. So what would be a lot better is a little more contrived, but more positive, and that's sit the kid down and say, "Look, I noticed something. That, it's kind of funny how people are. Like, when people talk, they're not always talking to everybody. I know that doesn't make sense. You can hear it, right? So it should be that they're talking to you, but turns out people are weird. Sometimes they are, sometimes they aren't. So there's some kind of clues that we want to try to clue into to figure out, is the person talking to me or is the person talking to somebody else? And just sort of have that conversation with your child and then practice. And the best practice, but you're giving them that prime, sort of that prompt beforehand, before you practice, so that the practice isn't high stakes and so that it's not nagging when you give them feedback, right? So you sit down maybe with your child and with somebody else, whether it's the sibling or husband or anything else, and just have conversations and intentionally say things to your child versus the other person, and make sure the other person is doing that too. Intentionally say things to you versus your child, and all the possible different combinations of that. And then you can set up some kind of like routine with your kid beforehand to where it's not frustrating, it's fun, where you could say something like, when I say freeze, everyone freeze like a statue and stop talking, and then we'll talk about what just happened, okay? So then you have the conversation, and the kid responds in some way. Like, let's say he doesn't respond when you're not talking to him. You say, freeze, and everyone's quiet, and you say, did you catch what you just did? I wasn't talking to you, and you didn't say anything. Perfect, high five, move on. So positive, practice-based and repeated practice, but lots of different examples, never the same conversation over and over, never the same setting, never the same people, all, vary everything, and make it as positive as possible. And there has to include some kind of reward that's meaningful to your child. If praise and high fives is good enough, perfect. If they need something more tangible, like tally marks for each time they got it right, fine, whatever. But figure out something that your child would actually appreciate earning as a consequence. And don't harp on when they make mistakes. Harp on when they get it right.
Which is hard. I kind of want to make a board game like that now.
That's a great idea.
Like this, I want to call our friends at Endless Games and say, make a board game.
There are some social skills board games, but I've never heard of one that actually targets that and that level of subtlety.
Yeah, there were a whole series of games that we bought at one point that were learn your manners games that were they called them social skills games, and it was things like ordering a pizza and things like that, and taking turns being the server, and there was going on a picnic and asking people what they wanted. It was those kinds of things, but a little bit more adult. First of all, I'll bet it would be great for our kids, but I bet it would be like a college game that college students would enjoy playing if there was a freeze thing and then and saying something and then having to guess which person you were saying to.
Right.
I'm going to call our friends at Endless Games after
All
this
right.
is over because they invent games. Okay, so our parent who wrote in before about having 4 people on the team in training wrote back and said that their BCBA is approved for 3 hours of training.
Do they say per week?
I believe, let me check, double sure here, 3 hours a week for training.
That is fantastic. So again, let me just echo the positive feedback that you got 25 hours a week of therapy, awesome, and you have 3 hours a week of oversight by a BCBA. That's really good. That's 12 hours a month, a little more actually. A month has 4.3 weeks. 12 hours a month of oversight from a BCBA, that is fantastic. That is enough to get the job done. That's enough for the BCBA to make sure your therapists are top quality. Of course, the BCBA has to be top quality to begin with in order to get that to happen. And they need to have some kind of training resources. So they may already have a training curriculum, PowerPoints and things like that. They may already have articles that they would assign for the therapist to read. If that's the case, great. If not, they can look at IBT, right? And they can download web-based trainings as sort of a starting point. The introductory therapist training at IBT is fantastic. I helped develop some of it, not much, but I helped them edit it and stuff. It's a great training. It's sort of the starting point, and then after that, it requires in-person, face-to-face feedback while the therapist is actually doing the job. So the BCBA gives them that for homework, maybe has them read a couple book chapters or something like that, and then after that, it's on the job, and it's just live feedback. Yes, what you just did with the client is perfect. No, don't do that. Try it a little bit faster. Perfect. Good job. Now, like that.
And I do want to make the case for people who are watching, if you're, I'm going to guess, since you've gotten that much supervision to be able to train, that you're in a state where ABA is just burgeoning. And we're going to see that in a lot more states. I do want to, before we're done talking about what's happening in South Dakota this morning, but one of the reasons that RBT training is there, from my understanding, is to ensure a level of knowledge and an ability to be able to understand the principles of ABA. There's another distinction that is coming down the pike as well, that is being able to be trained specifically for working with kids on the autism spectrum, that's just a little bit longer than that RBT. But I want to give the shout out to parents. Why should you care about this? Because what's coming down the pike, and we see this is happening in South Dakota this morning, they're making decisions about whether to pass the law in South Dakota and what they will fund and what level of credential the insurance company will fund. They've got it written into the law that they have to be a supervisor. They were able to yesterday amend the law to be able to say that it could be beginning therapists, but we know that the way the trend is going, at some point very soon, all of your insurance providers are going to require some sort of credential for every single person who works on your team in order for them to fund it.
Right. And honestly, and this might be a controversial statement, but honestly, that's important. That's good. There are very, very few other professions where the person who works directly with a patient doesn't have to have any kind of credential at all.
Right.
Very, very few. And I think ABA shouldn't be one of those. I mean, the RBT, something, either the RBT or something like the RBT or something like what the RBT is eventually going to turn into is going to be really important.
Right. And I agree with this. And years ago, we went through a scare in California where they were talking about that suddenly the regional center was not going to fund anybody who wasn't a BCBA.
Right.
And overnight, we were all going to lose our programs because our people had not had time to catch up.
Right.
And I remember thinking, what will happen to the thousands of children in California who have made all this progress? It kept me up at night. And we were able to, as a group of people, lobby the governor, who was at that point Arnold Schwarzenegger, and say, you have got to give a period of time in which for this to happen.
Right.
Now, they did, and it's still, trickling down and happening, but a lot of people were asleep at the switch in that moment and didn't say, then I better make sure that my people get this training.
A lot of people,
And I am saying to all of you as parents, get on this board and I don't mean a literal board, get on board with this idea of saying to your supervisors and saying to your providers, get that credential, because at some point it's going to happen and you don't want to lose all of your therapists.
And the truth is, it doesn't cost that much to get RBT, and it doesn't take very much time. It's not like a BCBA where even someone who's really hardworking and really smart, it's going to take them at least a year to get their BCBA. RBT, I think you can do in a month or two.
Yes,
it's really not that long.
40 hours.
Yeah, it's not that much
40
training,
hours.
and it's an evaluation that they have to pass, and they should be able to pass the evaluation. The evaluation is minimal. It's way lower than what we normally expect of all of our therapists at CARD. So it's not an unreasonable standard.
And I agree with that this is the direction that it needs to go as well. I agree that, we should have a standard at which when they walk through the door that they are working with your kids. I think that we do need to be pushing for that, but we need to be mindful of that it takes a little while to get there. Get ahead of it. Right. Get your people to get certified so that you don't miss a day of therapy. While you don't want to be scrambling after the law is passed and having to get them to pass it and have your child suffer in that moment. Okay, moving on here. Oh, good, we've got time. Okay, so a question about a teenager. My teenager still jumps up and down, flapping and hitting his legs when excited. Could be imagining an airplane taking off or seeing something interesting in movement. He jumps on the trampoline a few times a day. Should we work on intervention/replacement behaviors? Sometimes he catches himself after a few jumps, but sometimes is too excited, such as airports, to even be aware of it. Immense gratitude for you taking the time for the question, and have a beautiful day.
That's great. It's a great question. And, it's something we talk about a lot on your show, and we talk about a lot in ABA, is when is it time to intervene on a behavior? When is it appropriate to intervene? When is it a priority to intervene and try to reduce a behavior? And there's so many different factors that go into that, but the number one thing that I consider first is what is the meaningful sort of quality of life difference that this behavior is making in a bad way for this individual in their life. And if you can identify one that's significant, then that's the first red flag that we probably should target this behavior for treatment. There's lots of other things you got to consider too, but that's the number one thing. So if you consider that first, and the only thing you can come up with is something like the behavior makes me feel embarrassed, but I can live with it, or the behavior makes him look kind of weird to other people, but not people whose opinions really matter, like strangers, let's say, in public. Or the behavior is just kind of weird and annoying. Honestly, for me, usually that's not enough for me to want to reduce a behavior, especially a behavior that, let's face it, like it's kind of fun to do, right? I mean, you got to see it from the individual client's perspective too. Like, why is he doing that? Because it feels good and it's fun and he likes it, So if it's not producing any real harm for his ability to reach the goals that he values in his life and that you value for him, then I would say probably don't bother with it. Okay. But it's entirely possible that it is preventing him from reaching some of those goals, right? So like what values do you, or what goals do you value the most for your child who's doing that behavior? What goals do you think he values the most? Even if he's not able to tell you, you're his mom, you know him pretty well. Like, what do you think reasonably really matters a lot? If it's stuff that, if it's attending a class or a workshop, or if it's attending a club or something like that, that behavior's not going to work, he's going to get kicked out, then that might be a good reason to target that behavior for reduction and replace it with some alternative. So that's kind of the starting point.
My mind is going to a very specific place as you're talking about this, because recently I did a talk someplace and a young woman came up to me afterwards, and I have to be careful about what I say because I want to maintain anonymity for the situation. But she said to me, okay, I've got this issue, that I've got this boyfriend. This individual works with kids on the spectrum, she does, but the boyfriend that she's been seeing for a while has this thing that he does when he gets excited, and he does this flapping thing by his ears. And she said, I can't take my eyes off of it now, because all that I know, and I'm seeing this and going, this is not, and she said, we'll be at a restaurant and people will look, and she said, I feel a little uncomfortable and I feel like I want to say something to him about it. And we kind of had this conversation. I said, well, what is it preventing? Clearly it didn't stop you from dating this guy, right?
Right.
And how do you feel about this guy? Is this a relationship that, and she said, I really love him, but it kind of drives me batty. And she said, but worse than that, I've started to think in terms of, I'm going to have children with this guy, and are my children going to do this? And what? And, we had a whole discussion about it. It really, and I immediately, and I do this frequently, I shift to the mother of this person who's doing this and thinking, I'm standing here talking to a potential girlfriend who's saying, I love this guy and I want to marry him and I'm thinking about having babies with him, but this bothers me. And I was like, oh my gosh, what if, Jem's dating somebody who feels this way and I want to fix it. Right. I want to fix it now. Now it's important to me. And I'm like, I don't want you to not have babies with this man because he does this, right? But we did have a conversation about, what what are the things that bothered her about it, and it really was other people's opinions.
Right. And, frankly, that's something all of us go through, regardless of whether or not we have a family member on the spectrum. Everyone's worried about everyone's opinions all the time.
Yeah.
But it's also the case that the more we're able to focus on other things in our life, the better our life gets. Like, let's just be honest, right?
Yeah.
So,
and we did have that conversation about it. And I said, so these other nameless people at the restaurant that you don't know would be the people telling you who should be the father of your children? And she was like, oh, I don't think I care for that.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Yeah.
But we all do that. We all succumb to that at some point.
Everybody.
But I hope that someday that somebody's standing someplace and having a conversation with a potential love interest of my son to talk them into noticing that why should you care more about those people than you do about how you feel. I hope that happens. But, so I throw that out there to not only to this mom to think about, how much does it bother you, but, will it bother you if somebody...
Right.
And then I will say that eventually I got to the point where I thought, well, if somebody decided not to marry my son based on that, then they probably weren't the person I wanted him to marry anyway.
Maybe not a good match anyways.
Yeah.
But again, it's not black and white. It's all gray. Because it could be that there are people who would be a great match who just wouldn't even approach your son if he was acting weird.
That's true.
And it's not even because they're bad people. They just kind of wouldn't do it. People might just say, well, I guess whatever, and walk in the other direction. Whereas if they had approached your son and had the conversation, that might have been it. That might have been the end to a really important relationship. So it's it's all gray area. It's not black and white. It is
gray area. Well, we wish you luck with that. We are going to take a short break, and then we're going to be back with more of your questions. Stick with us.
What is autism?
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 I've been asking myself that for a very, very long time.
Let me think about that one.
Trying to just
Jeez. Let me think. Oh man, that's a rough one. Yes.
Autism.
Autism is a neurological disorder that affects many of our kids in different ways.
It's a learning disability that affects the cognitive functions of the brain.
A lot of people have the misconception that it's a disability, and it's really not.
I look at it as like a special gift.
When one person thinks differently from another.
It's an opportunity for everyone to learn to understand someone that's a little different than them. Autism is the ability to educate.
They're given so much talent in different areas.
To me, autism means a chance to be with and be around people you really care about. Autism is beautiful.
It's a way of seeing the world differently.
It's always unique, totally intelligent, and sometimes mysterious.
Happiness that comes out of my son's hard work.
It's a movement.
Unpredictable.
That's right.
Awesome. Love.
The field I want to work in.
Laughter, fun, joy. Autism is beautiful to me.
I want you to remember these 3 words. There is hope.
Welcome back to Autism Live. We're here with Dr. Jonathan Tarbox. He is a brilliant, brilliant man, and we appreciate that he's here to help us with some of these questions. Okay, so another question about a teenager. 14-year-old gets nervous with thunder. There was a lot yesterday, and he was relieved when I passed him his headset. Dad intervenes and wants him to man up and deal with it. In the car, Dad constantly talked to him, trying to distract him from the thunder fear. He was a champ and didn't cover his ears once. I'm torn. Was hoping to set up a desensitization intervention and fade the headset, but my son handled it, though he looked tense. Should I insist next time that hubby demands that he man up, that he say something every time when he sees my son wear his headset? He's a wonderful dad, but watched one too many Rambo, Rocky movies. Part 2, should we totally celebrate my son's success of not depending on the headset in this instance, or would that make him self-conscious and worry about the thunder more? He didn't cover his ears, but his body was curled up. His haircut frequency increased after that thunder episode. This is our haircut mom, so him wanting to cut hair afterwards was increased. So What do we think here? This is tough, right?
It's a tough one, yeah. But I mean, I honestly think the mom had the correct answer right at the very beginning, which was she wanted to set up a desensitization program.
Right.
It's one procedure we absolutely know will work. You can teach the person who's the most afraid of any stimulus to be okay with that stimulus if you do it gradually enough and you keep it positive and you do it in small amounts and you do it slowly. So that's the answer for sure. Now, when you think about it, that's like an antecedent intervention, right? Meaning you're like trying to prevent the problem from happening again in the future. Now, once the problem's happening, meaning the whole interaction with dad and Thunder and everything else, I'm not sure. Just handle it the best you can with your marriage to keep everything cool, right? Okay. But if that's happening, what that's telling you is you should have done your homework. Now, it's not too late. Don't beat yourself up. Do your homework now. It's not too late.
Okay.
So now, before the next thunderstorm, you've got, I don't know, a few days, a few weeks, a few months. Start now. It's not too late. You could start today. And again, like I can't give specific advice for exactly how to do it with individual clients, but what it would look like is start with listening to Thunder on a headset maybe even, or out of speakers or something, at a low volume. And when he doesn't cover his ears and when he keeps his cool, positive reinforcement, take a break. Next time, increase the volume a little more. Next time, maybe increase the duration of the clip that you're playing, right? And you just gradually increase until you get to a volume that's pretty intense. And especially if you have like speakers at home with a big subwoofer, like on surround sound or something, eventually you're building up to that, like blasting Thunder on that. And he doesn't cover his ears, and he keeps his cool, and he gets a big reinforcer, and he gets a break, okay? But do it slowly. And you don't have to make a big deal out of it. You can just say, hey, we're going to get used to, we're going to listen to some Thunder, no big deal.
Yeah.
And that's that. And yes, it's contrived, and yes, it's weird, but
it works.
It works. And you and he are going to be way happier. And is your husband going to be annoyed that he's dependent and treating him like a baby or something? Yeah, maybe a little. But you can also say, look, you can do it your way, and I'm going to do it mine. Just give me a chance. Let me do this a little bit. And just do it when he's not home.
Yes, and I think too, and we were just talking about this, and I'm going to tell on myself a little bit that I did not, so don't be my example, but I did not handle something well this morning, and I owe my husband an apology. And I had mentioned before on the show that we're going through a little bit of a thing right now where my husband has been doing the lion's share of getting Jem ready for school in the morning, and he's just doing way too much. He's just doing way too much. He's just a good guy, and he's a good dad, and he just wants to do everything, and he's so worried about getting him to school on time that he, rather than troubling Jem with, brushing his own hair and putting his own shoes on, Jim's going to do it for him.
Right.
And I get it. And I've tried to be the mom who says, come over here and talk to him about it. I really need to have a conversation when it's not happening.
Right, absolutely.
Right? But I keep forgetting that but it's easier to say than to do.
But tonight's an antecedent for tomorrow morning.
Right. Oh, and believe me, now I've forced it to the point where we have to have a conversation about it because I have to apologize. And that's a good thing. It's never a bad thing when you have to apologize. But anyway, I think that when, part of what I'm going to do tonight is take the time and start it with the conversation with, hey, I owe you an apology. Yeah. You were in mid-parenting, and I shut you down a little bit more severely than I meant to this morning. And I was like, what are you doing? Stop it, right? And that isn't really an exaggeration, which is sad and scary. But
nobody's perfect.
Right.
Even you.
Well, certainly not me. Certainly not me. If you look up not perfect in the dictionary, there's a picture of me, especially today. But in any case, I need to have a conversation with my hubby and have us get on the same page with what speed with which we want for him to be. And I would say to you, I would welcome you to think about that too and say, to your husband, let's get an agreement on this. How much time are you going to give me to do this? This is how much time I'd like to have do this. And then the thing that I have discovered with my husband is that you really want to be, and I'm so glad that we have a male person in the room with us that you can talk about, I don't want to be condescending, but with a lot of men, you got to be crystal clear about what the expectation is.
Sure, yeah.
Which means that, while I'm doing this intervention, before we get to the end point, if we're in the car or if we're someplace and we have the headphones, here's how I want you to support me and support this intervention. And if we don't have the headphones, here's what I want you to do and to support my intervention. And even we sometimes in our family have a code word for when something has gone off the tracks so that we don't let Jem know that something has gone off the tracks. So that if we, that if somebody says, and by the way, shuz butt, which is the Mork thing, Mork and Mindy, that the other person knows, oh, okay, I'm screwing it up without having said said, hey, you're blowing what we agreed to.
I like that. It's a great idea. I haven't heard that before. I love that.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
And
it's
a
it
pretty
also
old technique.
decreases some of the aversive functions of giving your spouse feedback right in the moment. It can be very aversive, right? But
Right.
if you have some code word that's almost kind of funny, then
Right.
it's like, okay, yeah, this is the thing we talked about. It's not you picking on
yes.
me. Yeah, I love that.
Yeah. So that it's not evident to the child that somebody else just got shut down, like I did this morning going, what are you doing? Stop that, right? There's a better way, and I'll try to work on that. But yeah, and the thing that I always remind myself is that while I will say to you that there's nothing more important than helping my son, the single best gift that I give my son on a regular basis is that I love his dad and his dad loves me and that we're in a relationship together. And as long as you can do that, and by the way, that takes two people and that can't happen with everybody, right? But as long as there's a way of saving that with two people, that's the thing to fight for as much as possible. So not yelling and going, what are you doing? Just not conducive to that. What can I tell you? Anyway, we're totally out of time, but I thank you so much for being here. Is it this next week that you're having your conference?
Yes, Tuesday is our free workshop for parents on challenging behavior. I'm going to be presenting practical advice on how to manage your child's challenging behavior in a way that's positive and upbeat and compassionate and fun.
I love that.
That's in Thousand Oaks at our Thousand Oaks office.
And there is childcare.
There's free childcare provided, and there's no fee to attend the workshop.
Where do they RSVP to or get more information?
They go to our nonprofit's website, which is autismresearchgroup.org.
Okay.
And if you're going to bring kids, do RSVP because the childcare slots are filling up.
Okay. That's in Thousand Oaks, California. We're pretty much out of time, but I just want to bring up a couple of things. We got some great guests next week, including Stephen Shore, who's going to be with us for the first time on the show, which is going to be fascinating and wonderful, everyone. We're also having Gina Giambi-Peters back on to talk about the ABCs and XYZs conference that Dr. Tarbox is going to be at, and that I believe Kelby and I are going to be there too. We're totally out of time. They're giving me the hook. So give your kids a hug from me and one for you as well. Bye-bye for now.